Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Batman Caped Crusader, the new animated show from Amazon Prime. Obviously, it's a DC comic show. It is a return to... It's probably the closest to a spiritual successor to the original Batman the Animated Series that we've had. Maybe ever, ever since the 90s, really. So I watched the first 3 episodes so far before I sat down to give some thoughts on it. I was only going to do two, but that was earlier today. I watched the first two, and then I was like, you know what, I've got some time. I'm going to throw in another episode, especially since the third episode looked like it was going to introduce the Catwoman character, and the bigger pool I've got to look at, the better. So this will mostly be spoiler free. If there's anything I want to get into spoilery for the 3 episodes, I'll say so at the end. I'll give you some warning, but. I'll just give the basic premise of like what each episode's about, I think, more than anything else for this, and just give some general feelings on how it works, what the interpretation of the characters are like, how the episodes flow, animation style, all that kind of thing. But I mean, first impressions are fairly positive. Honestly, I mean, hearing that Ed Brubaker was involved with the writing was a very positive sign early on, but I only have maybe a couple of nitpicks really at the end of 3 episodes. Obviously, it's going for a very specific style. It's meant to be set kind of in the 40s or 30s kind of time period, right around when Batman was first created. And even like the ears are very reminiscent of like Golden Age Batman. It's not a 1-to-1 for the Golden Age costume, but it's definitely got some of those vibes. And there's new interpretations of some of the characters, even just in these first 3 episodes. You have a very different Barbara Gordon, who's a lawyer. You have a Harleen Quinzel, who's a therapist, which is not new. Harley Quinn always started out as a therapist, but just seeing in this setting them taking these different routes with some of the characters, and there's a very different take on the Penguin in the first episode. So there's a lot of different spins to some of the characters. Harvey Dent seems like a bit more of a dickhead. Normally Harvey's presented as like a more noble character before he becomes Two-Face. The Harvey we've been introduced to in this is just kind of a sleazeball, for lack of a better word. But I think what I do appreciate about it, and maybe the benefit of this being an Amazon show where it's like 10 episode seasons, as opposed to, oh, we're going to do 80 episodes of a kid's TV show for a cartoon channel, is that it's not like it's super grown up in comparison to Batman the Animated Series, and that's kind of a testament to how well that show was done at the time. But there's just some little things where it feels like there's going to be evolutions to characters. Like I said, we're introduced to some characters before they become the villains they're going to become in the early episodes, and it feels like we are in an early days Batman story. This is early part of his career. There's reference to him still kind of being a bit of an urban myth. People don't really know if he exists right from the get-go in the start of the first episode. So you've got all those things at play, and you've got the sort of the old school style cars. You've got no technology that's newer than, say, like at one point there's like a radio bug, and it's literally been listened to on like an old school looking wireless device. So it's that sort of thing where it's sort of mostly retro with maybe some hints of like stuff that shouldn't be around in the time, because Batman's got advanced technology compared to everyone else, but that's pretty much the vibe that it's going for. And Batman the Animated Series always kind of had a little bit of that vibe, but this feels like it's going in even heavier. Like it's going in for a more Golden Age looking Catwoman, a more Golden Age looking whoever. But it definitely reminds me of watching that show, and it's actually kind of weird watching animation that reminds me of that show, but in like widescreen in HD with high quality assets. Like it's really interesting to see it, because don't get me wrong, like the old show was remastered in HD and looks great, and Mask of the Phantasm obviously was always kind of like that, but this just looks very pristine while still feeling like it's in the tone of the animation of that old style, which I believe, I don't know if every shot's done like this in this show, but there's definitely some of it where it's definitely doing that thing where they drew the backgrounds onto black paper or black canvas or whatever you want to call it. Assuming they're even hand drawing them anymore. I don't know if that's just like they digitally drew them onto a black background maybe this time, but regardless of like how they're doing it, it's definitely creating the feel of that sort of black graininess and some of the the art designs in the background, the buildings have that kind of texture to them. So whether it's a real texture because that's how they're still doing it, or because they're just doing a good job of recreating it digitally, regardless, it's making that feeling. So I'm into it. I think one of the big things to talk about, obviously, as well, is the characters and the voice actors that go along with them. And almost one of the negatives, I guess, of making me think and reminding me so much of Batman the Animated Series is that it almost makes it a tougher job for the new voice actors in some ways, because the visuals make me think of that show instantly. So when I hear Batman speak and it's not Kevin Conroy, and sadly it couldn't be Kevin Conroy now, but it does make it harder to take the new voice. And I think the new voice is all right. I think Hamish Linklater, I think his name is, he is doing a fine job. There's definitely a couple of moments here or there where it does kind of start to veer into the sort of voice that someone does when they're doing a parody of Batman, as opposed to like a straight Batman voice. You know, it feels like, oh, someone's doing the "Shut up, Alfred. I'm Batman." You know, I'm obviously exaggerating, but like, there's times where it's just tipping over the line a little bit into like the voice that a good impressionist would do to make fun of Batman, as opposed to actual Batman. A lot of the other voices are mostly fine. I will say Alfred caught me off a little guard as well. But again, I think it's mostly just because so much, even though he looks different, right? He does. He's a chubbier Alfred. Because the animation style and the overall tone is making me feel so many vibes of that original show, that just hearing this different Alfred voice and seeing a different Alfred is a little bit weird. It feels a little bit off. Like, oh. But I think that's just like a growing pains thing. I don't think that's something that I actually want to critique the show for. Maybe the moments where I said Batman's voice slips into parody sounding, maybe that's a genuine critique. But for the most part, I think this is mostly just learning to sort of appreciate the new voices, get used to them, make them feel like they belong in this world. A lot of the supporting cast are solid, though. I actually really like that they've got a Montoya there. They're doing something a little bit different with Bullock, where he's just a scumbag. Maybe he'll have a redemption of some kind. I'm definitely a fan of old school Bullock, which is he's the gruff cop who does have a bit of a shady past, but is kind of turning into a good guy in a grumpy way. Maybe they'll go down that path eventually, but in this, he's actually partnered with Flass, who's the traditional corrupt cop who, I don't know if he was introduced in Batman Year One, but that's certainly what I think of him as. He's in Batman Begins as well. He's very much usually one of the corrupt cops in the early Batman stories. But yeah, you've got a Harvey Dent introduced, we've got a Barbara Gordon, obviously we've got a Jim Gordon, we've got like I said, a Harleen Quinzel, some various crime bosses are introduced, especially in the first episode. It's actually one of the things that I liked about these first 3 episodes, actually, is they very much all focus on a different element of Gotham. In fact, one of the things that I was really noticing, comparing it to the old animated series, is how much it feels more like a show about everyone in Gotham than it is just about Batman. Like, Batman obviously is a main part of it, and there's a lot of them. But I felt like the screen time share was a bit more evenly divvied up. So in the first episode, for example, it revolves around Rupert Thorne, it revolves around Penguin. It spends a lot of time setting up Barbara. Barbara's a big character in the first episode because she's investigating some stuff, or she ends up getting involved with the crime family rivalry that the first episode's about between Rupert Thorne and the Penguin. Like, it feels like it establishes all these characters around Batman, and then Batman comes in at certain points, but he isn't always the focal point. In fact, I would say it's not until episode 3 where I felt like he was actually the main character of an episode, and I think he should be occasionally still. But it's actually really nice to have this show kind of bounce around a little bit and kind of treat it like an ensemble cast of the city that we're going to keep coming back to. And I think the first episode that very much deals with the crime family side of things and who the mob are in Gotham. The second episode gives us a more fantastical Batman villain, which I'll say who it is. So, I mean, if you find that to be a spoiler, but if you're a Batman fan, it's not a spoiler. You'll know who the villain is in the second episode the second a name is mentioned. But I'll say who that is in a second, because I want to talk about their take on it. But and then the third episode introduces Catwoman, like I said, and it kind of delves into Bruce and what he's going through and his past a little bit. Which is actually one of my critiques of the third episode, and maybe my least favourite moment of the whole thing, is that there's a few little flashbacks to when the Waynes died. And as a Batman fan, I'm just sick of seeing that at this point. and I didn't. Most of them aren't even bad. Most of them are completely fine. There is one that felt a bit too. I don't know. Bruce Wayne makes a declaration about what's happened at that age that feels a bit too on the nose. He's making big Batman choices far too soon. I'll just say, but by and large, I really liked how each of the episodes had a very different focus, and it felt like we were getting different elements of the city, different types of villains. Because even at one point in episode 3, Alfred says, well, this is just a jewel thief we're dealing with, this Catwoman. Like, she's not a villain, per se, right? She's not hurting people in the same way that some other villains will, and well, and that's not to say that the first episode is like this grounded crime story either. There's like a big there's a big weapon, I'll say, that's a bit fantastic. Well, not fantastical, but just it's a sort of silly thing that a supervillain would have, and that stuff is interesting. So yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the interpretations of the villains here. I think so. If you consider that a spoiler, maybe dip out. But I'm not going to spoil like how the plots wrap up or anything like that. I'm just going to kind of say what their take is on a few of these villains in these first few episodes. First of all, the Penguin in episode 1 is a woman. And I actually didn't realize I was looking at the Penguin at first. I thought it was just a Penguin-themed character working at the Iceberg Lounge, which the Penguin owns. And it wasn't until some dialogue from a couple of characters that I went, oh, that's actually just the Penguin. So that's an interesting change, very different. She even has some sons that are part of the plot, and that's a kind of a different thing. The one that I kind of really want to talk about, though, in episode 2 is Clayface. And I think episode 2 is probably my favourite episode of the 3 so far. One, because it's great that we get a Montoya-focused story. She's investigating the murders that are happening in the episode, especially since it presents this other good cop. Because, Jim Gordon in early Batman is always the good cop, and he's still the good cop here. But this presents Montoya, who's also a good cop, but is less interested in working with Batman. In fact, I actually don't know if Batman and Gordon have even met yet. Like, it's been kind of shy about showing that. So if it's happening, they're keeping it secret for now, and if it has not happened yet, then maybe we'll get that story later in the season. But just seeing a very different relationship with a good cop and Batman is interesting. But no, I liked how they played the Clayface story, because they'd really play around. If you don't know who Clayface is and you don't know what his abilities are, there may be some surprises here. But I love kind of the serial killer kind of vibe they had going. I love the more grounded kind of approach to him. He's not this big hulking Clayface monster. He's still human size, and he wears a hat and a cloak, and it's all very much, but it's more of a shapeshifter story where there's misleading information because he's appearing as different people and whatever else. And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a great focus on Montoya and a great different take on Clayface. It's not necessarily my new favorite take on Clayface. Like, I love classic monster Clayface. I love kind of anti-hero Clayface, which was an era about 8 years ago in the comics where he was part of one of Batman's teams, and that was great. Sympathetic, Clayface is an interesting thing as well. I think there's a lot of good versions of Clayface, but this one fits what this vibe this show is going for, and this type of era that the show is trying to feel like it's set in. It feels like a pulpy serial killer in this, as opposed to something else. And that's not to say that it's shying away from what Clayface can do. He's just not the size of the Hulk, right? It's a bit more, I enjoyed the performance of the actor as well. Appropriately theatrical, I will say. And then Catwoman in episode 3, Christina Ricci, of course, is a big name to get to play one of the roles. And yeah, she's good. I liked the take on Catwoman for the most part. Again, the more golden age, she's more of a spoiled rich brat who wants to do this, as opposed to because a lot of like origin stories for Catwoman will be like, oh, she grew up poor and she was either a prostitute or whatever. Here, this is going for more. No, she is also she even refers to herself as a rich orphan, and Bruce points out that that's not entirely accurate for one reason or another, but it definitely presents a different type. But she's very playful. This idea that she's inspired by Batman to kind of start having a costume, but I felt like the way she interacts with Batman and the way she tries to draw some fun out of him, right, with that playful kind of flirting or whatever you want to call it, I thought that stuff was working quite well. I found myself very into all 3 of these episodes. There's the odd little thing. Being a Batman fan since I was a kid, there's a lot of little things where I just like or dislike certain takes on things. But for the most part, the takes in this that are different feel like, oh, you know what, it's its own version, it's its own world. I can kind of just go along with it. The flashbacks in episode 3 are the one thing that made me go, you know, like, I've seen this too many times at this point, and one scene in particular is a little bit, Maybe I'll say spoilers in a bit so I can actually just say what it is. But I think the actual flow of the episodes is really good, and like I said, I think my favourite thing about it is how it feels like it's building an entire cast of characters that all feel like they're getting a reasonable amount of time. You know, there's a little bit of Barbara Gordon in episode 3, but it feels like, no, she's been set up to come back at some point and be a bigger part of another episode. Same with Montoya, same with anyone they've introduced up until this point. And I think all those bits are quite good. It feels as well like there was a little bit of progression in the world. You know, unlike an old school cartoon where it feels like almost nothing changes between episodes. With this, they're fairly standalone stories, but it does feel like by the end of episode 3, it'll be like, oh, the world might know now that Batman exists a bit more than it did before, and that seems like something they're going to carry forward and not forget. So there is like a world status, if you will, that's evolving as certain stories play out, and I like that too. But it's really the sort of treating Gotham as an ensemble of characters, you know, in the same way, well, not the same way, but do you know in the way that The Simpsons has like an entire roster of like B characters that they keep coming back to, whether it's Barney or Moe or Principal Skinner or Burns or Groundskeeper Willie or whoever, right? There's an entire town filled of like smaller characters that can come in and out without any questions asked. Now that's all for comedy's sake, but in the same way with this, it feels like they're setting up all these different Bat universe characters. And so far, I've not really found myself being unhappy with any of them. I would like to see a bit more of Batman and Gordon having a relationship, if that's what they're going to do. And I'm also curious to see maybe why they chose to have Barbara Gordon be a more of an adult already and a lawyer. I hope this isn't Bruce Timm going back to the Bruce and Babs romance well, because I really don't want that. Worst thing he's ever done. But you know, that's just basically speculation at this point. But like, honestly, I had a good time. I think if you're a fan of the old animated series, I think you'll find stuff to like here. I think it feels very, very focused in its style. It feels very confident in what it's doing. And I think if you're sick of, I don't know, more bland superhero stuff, this didn't feel bland to me. This felt like there was a creative voice or two behind it that were really driving a feeling overall, and I think I really quite like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to necessarily review any more of it, just because, you know, they're 25-minute episodes, which are a good length for this, by the way. A couple of minutes longer than maybe some of the old animated shows, but just a nice amount of time. But I don't know like how much on each individual episode I'd have to really talk about. They'd probably end up being very, very short. And, you know, I think with this, it's really great to talk about my overall feelings after a few episodes, because there's a lot of things to kind of bring up and talk about. But I'm not sure, like, breaking down each episode would work in quite the same way as I do it with, you know, with the live action hour-long dramas and whatnot. But it's very good. And I do want to watch the rest of it, and I'm glad it's already been renewed for season 2. Hopefully I still feel that way when I get to the end of the season. But, you know, I appreciate that Batman is super, like, stoic in this. Because this idea that if this is meant to be like Batman in his first year or so of being Batman, he should be colder, he should be more closed off. Every time Alfred tries to break through to him or give him some advice or try and recommend that he do something for his mental health, he just shuts him down immediately. And that is what early days Batman should be like. That's something that hopefully, if the show runs a few seasons, they can chip away at that armor a little bit. Maybe season 2 will introduce a Robin, perhaps. I don't know. But regardless, really good so far. So I'll just say quickly, spoilers, right? I just want to say spoiler warning quickly for episode 3, so I can say the scene that I didn't like. But I did not like the one flashback where young Bruce like goes into Alfred's bedroom in the middle of the night, when it's, you know, soon after the parents have died, and he's like, "They're going to pay, Alfred. They're all going to pay, and you're going to help me." that was a bit cheesy and on the nose and didn't quite work for me, right? I made fun of the TV show Gotham for doing something similar, where like, you know, a week after the Waynes have been killed, Bruce Wayne's like standing on the mansion, like try to push himself. He's like, I'm overcoming my fear, Alfred. I'm overcoming my fear. I must be the you know, vengeance. I must be the knight. I must be something that I can't decide yet because I can't say Batman yet. But yeah, that felt a bit much for me. But it's like one little scene. Yeah, I actually really like the final little flashback because it's a point of view I don't think we usually get with the Waynes being murdered in the alleyway, which is just seeing what Alfred was doing. Like Alfred's just like sort of wiping the car and he hears some gunshots, and the episode ends with him just running into an alleyway. I actually thought that was a really poignant little ending for the episode. It's those little moments that really give us a good bit of atmosphere and vibe. I really like that. But I must admit, when the episode started with a close up of the pearls on the display, which obviously sets up that Catwoman's going to be cat burgling and whatnot. But once it set that up, I was like, oh, oh no, we're doing pearls. I'm seeing these pearls. I've seen enough of these pearls to last me a lifetime. But yeah, also it's really funny. Since I said spoilers already, Bruce Wayne being forced into therapy is also a funny concept because he clearly has a lot of demons to unpack. And the idea that she can tell that there's more to him that he's letting on, but she can't keep pushing, is also really interesting. So plus it also got a genuine laugh out of me when he thought he'd swiped his file, but Harleen had just gave him a blank file with a little post-it note saying, "I'll see you next week, Bruce." And then Bruce being all like, "It's nothing, Alfred. Don't ask me about it. I'm tough. I'm Batman." I don't know. I had a good bit of fun with that. So, no, good vibes. Good vibes. I do. Yeah, as always, I'll say it whenever there's a binge show out. I wish it was spread out weekly, or maybe in this case, since it's only 25 minutes, maybe 2 a week would have been nice. Just to spread out the love and be excited for the next one, and you know, really anticipate that opening title music and whatnot. Which the music's not really standing out to me too much. It's fine. It's working well enough. I do like the animation style though for the opening title sequence. It's again nice bit of mood. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Batman Caped Crusader. At least the first 3 episodes, I'm feeling quite positive. It's pretty good. It's nice to enjoy a bit of superhero media again, since I've been just kind of apathetic about the Marvel stuff for the last like 3 or 4 years at this point. But hey, cool. So thank you very much for joining. You can, of course, support all the content by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us over there for as little as $3 per month and get some bonuses, but mostly just help keep everything, you know, coming, reviewing TV shows all week, reviewing movies over on the movie podcast on MailFuzz Movies. We can do all that because of Patreon and YouTube memberships and stuff of that like. But you can also like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All these things help out as well. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?